Management, Decision and Control, Paper 11, CPA, Senior Huntington. Now today we are going to look at the learning curve theory. The learning curve theory is a key part of the CPA Paper 11 syllabus. It features exclusively in this paper and is always certain to be tested. We need to understand the principle underlying the learning curve theory. Now, the principle underlying the learning curve theory is generally well understood. If we perform tasks of a repetitive nature, the time we take to complete subsequent tasks reduces until it can reduce no more. Meaning that whenever an individual starts a job which is fairly repetitive in nature, this individual is likely to become more confident and knowledgeable about the work as he gains experience. So he becomes more efficient and he does the work more quickly. So the learning curve is based on the principle that the learning process starts from the point when the first unit comes off the production line, meaning that the moment we produce the first unit, the learning process starts. Eventually, however, when he has acquired enough experience, there will be nothing more for him to learn, and so the learning process will stop. Meaning that the learning process stops when that worker or when that individual has nothing to learn, because he has the experience, he has all what it takes to be efficient. So if there is nothing to learn, then at that point where there is no further learning, we call that the steady state production level. Now, the steady state production level is that level of production when no further improvement is expected and the regular efficiency level is reached. Now, the learning curve theory applies to those situations where the workforce as a whole improves in efficiency with experience. So the learning effect or the learning curve effect describes the speeding up of a job with repeated performance. What is a learning curve? Now, a learning curve is simply a function that measures how the labor hours per unit declines as units of production increases. Why? So whenever the labor hours per unit decreases as production increases, this is so because workers are learning and becoming better at their jobs. So managers use learning curves to predict how labor hours or labor costs will increase as more units are produced. Meaning that the learning curve theory is relevant to management accounting in key areas, that is cost estimations and standard costing. So the learning curve theory may be useful for forecasting production time and labor costs in certain circumstances. Now, one thing which you need to know about the learning curve theory is that it tries to look at the relationship between the cumulative quantities and the cumulative average time. Now, there are two methods to calculate the learning rate: the tabular method and the algebraic method. Both methods are examinable. The principles are straightforward, but the questions can be tricky and take various forms. Therefore, it is essential that you practice as many learning curve questions as possible. The algebraic method. The formula for the learning curve is y equaling to ax power b. That is the algebraic method, where b, that is the learning coefficient or the index of learning. So you need to know how to come up with the value of y, how to get the value of a, how to get the value of x, and how to come up with the value of b. Now, how do you calculate b? To calculate b, you get log of the learning rate over log 2. So you simply need to get your calculator. That was a scientific calculator. So you get your scientific calculator, you press log the learning rate, then you divide log 2. So meaning that the learning rate will always be given and it is always expressed as a percentage. However, when it comes to calculations, we have to change this percentage into a decimal. Take an example. If it's 80%, we express it as a decimal, so that will be 0.8. That will be 0.8. So we have our formula, which is y equaling to ax power b. Now we need to know what each stands for. Y stands for what, a stands for what, x stands for what, and b stands for what. Now y is the cumulative average time per unit to produce x units, meaning that as we produce more units, the average time taken to produce each unit is not the same. So y is always that average time taken to produce each unit of the cumulative number of units. X, that is the cumulative number of units. A, that is the time taken for the first unit of output. That time it takes for you to produce the first unit. Then B is the index of learning, as I have told you, that is log learning rate over log 2. Then LR, that is the learning rate, and we always express that as a decimal. Now, we need to understand how to use logarithms and the value of b. So it is always essential to understand how to apply the learning curve formula. You need a calculator. Of course, that has to be a scientific calculator, because you can't use an electronic calculator to come up with logarithms. So meaning that we need to be having a scientific calculator which we can use to calculate logarithms. Now, what are logarithms? Logarithms, these are a value of any number to the power of 10. For example, the logarithm of 3 is 0.477113. Get your calculator, press log 3. The result is 0.4771213, because 10 power 0.4771213 is 3. So using a calculator, it is a simple process to obtain the log value of any number. Now in our formula, y equaling to ax power b, 3 of the items are straightforward. X is always given, and that is the cumulative number of units produced. Y, that is the cumulative average time for the first unit to be produced, that is the cumulative number of units, but the time it takes to produce each unit, that is your y. Then A, that is always the time it takes to produce the first unit. So our only problem is calculating B. We need to master how to calculate the value of B in this formula. Now, how do we calculate B? As I have already told you, you need a scientific calculator which has the logarithm button. The learning rate is always expressed as a proportion. So if it is an 80% learning curve, then it simply means that the learning rate is 0.8. And for a 90% learning curve, it is 0.9 and so on. So if you want to get the value of B, you press log learning rate over log 2. Now there is something you need to master. The examiner has stated that you should not round the value of b to less than 3 decimal places. So it's advisable to keep that long number in your calculator and use it for your subsequent calculations and workings. Now we are going to use the formula in this example. We need to see how can we use this formula to determine the labor costs, to determine the time it takes to produce a given number of units, and so on. So suppose that an 80% learning curve applies to a production of a new product item, ABC. Remember, one of the conditions or one of the assumptions of the learning curve theory is that there has to be a new product. So it applies in situations where we have a new product. So to date, at the end of June, 30 units of ABC have been produced. So far, the company has produced 30 units of ABC to date. Budgeted production in July is 5 units, meaning that in July, they expect to produce more 5 units. The time to make the very first unit of ABC in January was 120 hours, meaning that it takes 120 hours to produce the very first unit. That was in January. The labor cost is shillings 10 per hour. So each hour costs 10. Calculate the time required to make the 31st unit. Calculate the time required to make the 31st unit. Remember, they have produced 30 units to date, that is by the end of June. However, in July, they expect to produce more 5 units, meaning that by the end of July, the cumulative production will be 35 units. Though by the end of June, the cumulative number of units is 30 units. But you are required to calculate the time required to make the 31st unit. Then part B, calculate the budgeted total labor cost for July. Calculate the budgeted total labor cost for July. Remember, in July, we are only producing 5 units. So they want you to come up with the total cost taken to produce the 5 units in July. Now, part A of the question, we are required to calculate the total labor cost taken to produce the 31st unit. Now, to solve that problem, you need to calculate 3 things. We need to calculate the cumulative total labor cost so far to produce the 30 units of ABC. Remember, by the end of June, the company has produced 30 units of ABC. So we need to find out what is the total labor cost to produce those 30 units of ABC. To produce the 30 units of ABC. So we need to first solve for A. Then B, the cumulative total labor cost to produce 31 units of ABC. Then C, the cumulative total labor cost to produce 35 units of ABC, that is adding on the extra 5 units for production in July. Now, meaning that if I want to find out the time taken to produce the 31st unit, I need to come up with the value of A and the value of B. Then the difference between our B and the A, that is the time taken to produce that 1 unit, that makes the 31st unit. The 31st unit, that 31st unit, that's the cost we need to find out, the time taken to produce that 31st unit. that K1 unit, that extra one from the 30, because initially we have a cumulative of 30, but cumulative, we needed to make a cumulative total of 31 unit. So that time taken to produce the extra unit, that's what we need, as well as its cost. Then part B, the total labor cost of July, we are going to come to that and we see how to calculate that. But let us first look at our part A of the question, that is calculating the total labor cost taken to produce that 31st unit, that extra 1 unit. Now to produce the first 30 units, we need to use our formula. Remember, it is y equaling to a x power b. Y equaling to x power b, where b is our log learning rate over log 2. Remember, our learning rate in this case was given as 80%, so meaning that we have to express that as a decimal, and that will be log 0.8 over log 2. Now that gives us a value of negative 0.321981. Don't forget that negative has to appear on your subsequent calculation, so don't ignore that negative. So y, that is the cumulative average time taken to produce the 30 units. Our a, that is the time taken to produce the very first unit, that is 120. Then x, that is the cumulative number of units, which is 30. Then we already have our value of b. So meaning that the cumulative time taken to produce the first units is 40.147 hours. That is the time taken on average to produce each unit out of the 30 units. Meaning that if you want to get the total time, now this 40.147 hours, that is the cumulative average time per unit to produce the first 30 units. Now, if you want to come up with the total time for the first 30 units, we get the 30, that is your x, then times the average time taken to produce each unit, that is 40.147 hours, giving us a total of 1,204.41 hours. Now, this is the time taken to produce the first 30 units. Now we need to find out the time to produce the first 31 units. Remember, the other time is to produce 30 units. Now this time is to produce the first 31 units. So in this case, our x is 31. The rest of the variables remains the same. So meaning that y equaling to a, that is the time taken to produce the first unit, that is 120, times our x, which is now 31, power b. Now this gives us a cumulative average time per unit of 39.726 hours. So the total time for the first 31 units, that is 1,231 hours. This is the time taken to produce the first 31 units. So meaning that the difference between 1,231.51 and 1,204.41, that difference is the time taken to produce that extra 1 unit. So the time to produce the 31st unit is the difference between the other two values, and that is 27.1 hours. So that is the time taken to produce that 31st unit. That is the time taken to produce our 31st unit. So meaning that that was part A of the question. That time it takes to produce that 31st unit, that time is 27.1 hours. Now when it comes to calculating the budgeted labor cost in July, Remember, in July, we have produced extra 5 units. So meaning that we need to make X 35. We need to find out the time taken to produce the 35 units, because now in July, by the end of July, so far we have produced 35 units by the end of July. So meaning that our variables remain the same, only that now X has changed to 35. So on average, to produce the 35 units, each unit takes 38.203 hours. So the total time for the first 35 units, that is 1,337.11 hours. So we get a cumulative number of units, that is 35, times the cumulative average time per unit to produce those 35 units. So if we want to get the budget labor cost in July, remember in July we are producing extra 5 units. So meaning that if I want to find out the number of hours required to make those extra 5 units, so we get the cumulative total time to produce the 35 units minus the time which was taken to produce the 30 units by the end of June. So in July, by the end of July, we see that we have a cumulative number of hours, that is 1,337.11, and by the end of June, we had produced 30 units, and those 30 units took 1,204.41 hours. So the difference in these two figures, that is the number of hours taken to produce the 5 units in July. But remember, we are interested in a cost. So our cost per hour is shillings 10 according to the question. So meaning that we get that difference times 10, and the result is shillings 1,327. So meaning that the labor cost in July, which was incurred to produce the extra 5 units of ABC, is shillings 1,327. That is the algebraic method. You need to know how to use that formula. So satisfy yourself that this formula works by trying out several questions from past papers, from revision kits, and from other sources. Now, the CPA MDC paper 11 requires knowledge of this theory, and the examiner may ask you to calculate the time required to produce a given number of units and maybe the labor cost for a given production level, as in our example. Now, in the next session, we are going to see how do you derive the learning rate. How to derive the learning rate, or how to find that learning rate. Remember, that is a constant percentage at which the average time per unit is decreasing as cumulative output increases. So in our next session, we are going to see how we can come up with the learning rate. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and share with friends to benefit also. Thank you.